Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Kristen Welker. As President Trump's new tariffs officially take effect, upending the global trading system and threatening to force Americans to pay more for everything from groceries to appliances and clothing. The tariffs taking effect at midnight on some 90 countries. It puts tariffs overall on U.S. imports at the highest they've been since the Great Depression. The president touting his tariffs just minutes before the clock struck midnight, posting on social media, quote, billions of dollars in tariffs are now flowing into the United States of America. His Treasury Secretary this morning claiming the new tariffs will be a boon to manufacturing in the United States.
We are trying to rebalance trade in America's favor. President Trump has said, and I've said, we want to bring back the high-precision manufacturing jobs. We want to get rid of these big deficits that we have with countries that have created these big surpluses, and gutted our manufacturing base right, and have been terrible for American workers.
Now here's a live look at the White House, where we could hear from the president this hour at a ceremony for Purple Heart recipients and potentially take questions from reporters. Today marks the culmination of a tariff rollout that began more than 4 months ago. A rollout hampered by delays, extensions, and confusion over the size and scope of the new trade deals. Confusion that has persisted even as the president threatens even more tariffs in the coming days and weeks ahead.
We're going to be putting a very large tariff on chips and semiconductors. But the good news for companies like Apple is if you're building in the United States or have committed to build, without question committed to build in the United States, there will be no charge. We'll be putting a tariff on of approximately 100% on chips and semiconductors. But if you're building in the United States of America, there's no charge, even though you're building and you're not producing yet in terms of the big numbers of jobs and all of the things that you're building.
Now, this comes as Americans continue to show widespread concern about the state of the economy. Just 31%, that's less than a third, say the economy is excellent or good. That's according to the new CNBC All-America Economic Survey. But the president's handling of the economy is just 8 points underwater in that survey, a slight improvement since April. With me now from the White House is NBC News Chief Justice and National Affairs Correspondent Kelly O'Donnell, along with NBC News Senior Business Correspondent Christine Romans. I'm also joined by Jared Bernstein, who served as chair of the Council of Economic Advisors under President Biden. He was also chief economist and economic policy advisor to Joe Biden when he was vice president. Thanks to all of you for starting us off today. So, Kelly, I have to start with you at the White House. There are still a whole lot of questions about these tariffs, even as they took effect overnight. Do you have a sense of just how committed this White House is to the sweeping tariffs? Are they permanent? What are your sources telling you?
Well, good to be with you, Kristen. And there are many questions, and that's been embedded in the entire rollout of months of tariff talk from the Trump administration. Clearly, the president has been committed with a 40-year support for this kind of financial policy, trying to reorder the global method of trade, and his top advisors saying that they're trying to change the United States from being what they described as a beggar nation, the last consumer of choice for many other partner countries that they would do trade with, into a more secure consumer and have a more balanced approach. That's sort of the idea that we've been hearing from this administration. What is hard to discern is all of the fine print that the president often introduces, pulls back, adjusts, and so forth. Even in the clip that you played where he talked about trying to get manufacturing in the United States, but if you've already demonstrated a commitment, maybe there's a way to make a deal. So the deal maker part of the president continues to be enforced, even as top officials say no more deals to be made. There's some hard to understand rationales or results of the president's choices where a country like Switzerland at nearly a 40% tariff without any ability to seem to be able to negotiate that down. Other places you see the president describe his intentions with trying to use tariffs to be a cudgel to have certain nations no longer do business with Russia, or to try to impact some of their internal political dynamics like Brazil. So Are they committed to tariffs? They appear to be. Will that change if there are market forces that suggest that the public is concerned or that economic conditions inside the United States dictate making another adjustment?
Kelly, you know, another piece of this is the fact that the president is saying he will actually impose additional tariffs on semiconductors, chips, pharmaceuticals. When can folks expect a formal announcement on some of those?
Well, it's interesting because the president has been talking about this, often bringing in a new sector or sort of complement of tariffs that he's considering while he's working on something else. So that was an announcement alongside Tim Cook of Apple, and there was a lot of discussion of could there be a future of an iPhone being built in the United States, and Cook described what he thought could be happening there. Semiconductors, those kinds of pieces of the supply chain that are so essential to many of the goods that we use day to day. How quickly that could come, the president has floated a variety of ideas. Certainly the prior administration, and Mr. Bernstein can speak to it, the Biden administration was trying to get semiconductors built in the United States again. So one of the big questions is how quickly? Is the workforce available? Is the investment available in the time frame that the president is talking about with 3.5 years left in his term?
Really important questions and great reporting as always. Kelly O'Donnell, great to see you. Thanks so much for being here. Really appreciate it. Christine Romans, let me head over to you now. I think the big question on every person's mind all across the country, when will consumers actually start to feel the impact of these tariffs? Because so far we've seen some price increases, but it's not as though we've seen an across-the-board increase.
Yeah, you're right. When will we see it and how much? That's a big question. Until now, many of these big companies say they have been eating the tariff cost themselves. You've seen the big hit that the automakers have taken, billions of dollars they've taken in losses from the tariffs. They've been loath to pass it along because so many Americans are just exhausted by inflation. You know, this president was elected because people thought the cost of living was out of control. And now we're on the forefront here of what many say will be higher prices for all the things you're seeing there on your screen. I will say clothing prices have already started to rise, footwear prices as well. You know, some of these big footwear companies, they make almost everything in China and in Asia. They've already been raising prices on high-end sneakers. So the question is, how much longer will importers hold off on price increases so they don't lose their customers?
Well, and I think the other piece of this, Christine, folks are seeing that jobs number report that came in weaker than expected. Some volatility certainly on Wall Street. Broadly speaking, can you assess the impact of tariffs so far on the economy, or is it just too soon to say?
Well, you've been seeing that weakness in the labor market. That's an important place to look. You've seen inflation begin to slowly creep back up. And this is a really dangerous combination. It's one of the reasons why the Federal Reserve may have its hands tied at some point. This is the S word that so many people worry about, stagflation. And we're not there yet. The U.S. economy overall still quite robust. But when you have inflation creeping higher and the job market starting to deteriorate, that's concerning for the Fed because it can't just cut rates to juice the economy, because it'll further fuel inflation. So that's a dangerous position to be in for the Federal Reserve. We just don't look. We haven't seen what the president and his team have promised to be the benefits, the big benefits of this, where so much money coming in that everyone is so rich. In fact, we don't even have to pay income taxes anymore because the tariff money is going to make up for that. We're not there. We're also not at that doom and gloom scenario of 6 months ago when this was so shocking. The idea of 17% average tariffs that a lot of folks were saying you're risking a recession if you do that. Both of those opposites. That's not where we are. We're somewhere in a transition in the middle, trying to navigate really what is a reordering of the global system.
All right. Well, Christine Romans, it's always great to have your perspective and reporting. Thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it. Let's head over to Jared Bernstein now. So, Jared, bit of the same question to you. Can you give us a big picture sense of the impact that you are seeing so far due to these tariffs and what you anticipate we'll see? Because so far we haven't seen inflation spiking, GDP numbers still fairly solid. What do you make of where we are right now?
I think it's very clear that tariffs are really taking a toll on this economy. As you've just been discussing, I don't see a recession where we are right now, or perhaps not even in the near future. But it is unquestionably the case that the economy has been dealt a non-trivial blow. So GDP grew at 2.5% last year. So far this year, it's growing at half that pace, 1.2%. Now, I know that's kind of an obscure number. What are we talking about with this aggregate kind of analysis? But that really makes a difference. When the economy is growing about half as fast as it should, which it is, it shows up in the job market as slower job growth. And you heard Christine talk about some indicators that are robust. Well, one that isn't is the fact that the past 3 months have averaged 35,000 jobs per month. That is too slow in terms of job creation to prevent the unemployment rate from going up. Consumer spending, which has been such an important driver of this economy, directly related to the cost of tariffs, it's actually been flat this year after growing at 3% last year. So you don't have to look that far into the hard data to see these impacts.
So you don't think that the economy is headed for a recession? Is what you are describing effectively stagflation? And for the audience, can you explain what that means?
Well, first of all, let me say I don't think we're in a recession now. I think that if the Trump administration continues to double and triple down, we don't get the kind of certainty we need when these supposed deadlines just keep passing and Trump continues to negotiate. So I do think there are threats to the future. But right now, no, I don't think we're in a recession. I do think stagflation is beginning to occur. And as has been mentioned, this is a problem because what it means is increasing inflation with decreasing growth. Now, those don't usually show together. When the growth rate slows down, the inflation rate tends to come down. But now we have them pushing in opposite directions because tariffs both hurt us on the growth side and make inflation a bigger problem. So we are looking at some nascent stagflation. It's a problem for the Fed, but more importantly, I think it's a problem for just working Americans who believe that this president was going to lower their costs, not raise them.
Jared, as we're having this conversation, I should tell you that our group of pool reporters that gathers every day at the White House is reporting that President Trump is about to make a, quote, major announcement on the economy. So we are going to stay tuned for that. As soon as they go into the Oval Office, we will dip into that. But to continue our conversation here, talk a little bit, if you could, about what you are anticipating in terms of consumer prices. What might it mean?
It's a good question today because one group that's been tracking this very carefully is the Yale Budget Lab, and they came out with a new analysis today that incorporates the most recent tariff information, and they think that tariffs are going to increase the inflation rate by the end of this year with prices a couple of percent higher than they would have been otherwise. So translating that into the rate of inflation, instead of looking at something closer to 2 by the end of this year, 2%, probably looking at something closer to 3%. And by the way, the last CPI we saw was 2.7, so we're already in that ballpark. By the way, on the president's announcement, I wonder if he's going to say, we've heard a little bit of rumors about this, that he is appointing his CEA chair to be the interim governor at the Fed, given the seat that was just vacated there.
Well, you take us perfectly to our next guest, Jared Bernstein. Thank you so much. You're referring to Stephen Miran, of course. And let me go to CNBC senior economics reporter Steve Leisman. Steve, you are confirming now that President Trump has, in fact, tapped someone to serve as an interim Federal Reserve or on the Federal Reserve board seat in an interim basis. What can you tell us?
Yeah, the president has, in fact, tweeted out, or whatever it is he does these days with the social media, that he will be nominating Stephen Miran, his CEA chair, to fill a open slot, which opens tomorrow on the Federal Reserve Board of Governors. Now, note, this is not replacing the chair here. The chair is Jay Powell. His chairmanship ends in May. And we're waiting to hear if the president already has an idea of who to nominate. He came on our air earlier this week, and he said he has 4 people in mind. One of them was not Stephen Miran, but just FYI, he's appointing Stephen Miran to the position temporarily or for the 4 months remaining in that particular tenure. And then he'll say, we'll see about having somebody else take that job later. So it's kind of an interim. It's a funny little thing here. We're not really sure what it means. But again, this is the president putting somebody he trusts, somebody who's a big supporter and advocate of his policies. In fact, Stephen Stephen Miran is one of the thinkers behind the president's policies of the importance of bringing down the trade deficit, even devaluing the dollar while trying to maintain it as the world currency, and in fact doing some somewhat worrisome stuff with the U.S. debt and foreign holders of it.
And just talk about why this position is so significant, Steve, for the folks who are watching right now.
Well, let's see. By the time the chair is nominated in May, the president will have 4 of the 7 boards of governorships appointed by him. Just so everybody knows, the way the Federal Reserve Board votes, it's 12 votes, 7 boards of governors, and 5 district presidents who rotate in and out among the 12. So the question becomes, can the president, through these appointments, bend the Federal Reserve to his will? And that depends a bit upon whether or not these governors act like sometimes Supreme Court justices have acted, which is to kind of surprise them by not going along with where the party was on different legal things, and sometimes surprising the other side by going amazingly along with what the party thought they were going to do. So they will be independent. These are 14-year terms they're appointed to. The chair is a 4-year job, so they are supposed to be independent. But the president will have 4 of 7 by this time next May, including the chair.
Switching now, Steve, to these tariffs, what we've been talking about throughout our hour. Can you put this into perspective for our viewers? How sweeping are the tariffs, and how quickly do you think consumers writ large are going to really start to feel the impact?
So, Kristen, I'm very interested in this as an economics reporter and as a reporter, because these tariffs were put on and we have seen some modest increases in prices. And the reporter in me is interested in how the story has set in that these tariffs don't have a big impact. But let's just be clear, from a timing standpoint and from a business standpoint, these tariffs have only just begun. The idea that somehow it's been ingrained that the story is, hey, these tariffs have no impact, I think is a very, very early days to show it. And in fact, what evidence we have is a little worrisome to me. The big revision to the jobs is serious. We had a step down in growth, meaningful step down in growth. Jared talked about the step down in consumer spending, but I don't think you've seen much of it yet filter down to the consumer. At the same time, you are collecting, and you did collect in July, tariffs at a $350 billion annual rate. This is one of the largest tax hikes we've seen. The American public is essentially paying for this one way or another, and this is going to have a meaningful impact. And I think it's very early days to say either way which way this is going to go and how much of an impact it will have. But I am sure it will raise prices over time, or, as you and I have discussed over time, will mean a serious decline in profit for the companies that are importing this stuff.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.